Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel. And as we bring in the new year, I thought it was about time to do an updated tier list video for the new year. Of course, we also have Portland Regionals this weekend, so it's perfect timing to talk about where the metagame is right now as we head into the new year and also as we head into Portland Regionals. So here is the updated 2024 January tier list video, looking at all the best decks right now and where they rank right now after we just had the San Antonio Regionals a couple of weeks ago and as we head into Portland later this weekend. I'll leave a link down below to the tier list if you want to go try it yourself. And also if you go on to enjoy the video, leave a like on the video. It'd be appreciated here on the second channel. Yeah, here we go. 2024 January tier list video. Let's get into it. So starting things off, we got Charizard. So I think if we're going to talk about Bibarel TM Evil Zard, I think it's a tier 2 deck. I don't think that Bibarel Zard is that great overall. If I was to compare it to Pidgeysard, we know Pidgeysard is just the better version of Charizard. Definitely, Bibarel Zard is like kind of weak. It's just a weaker version of Pidgeysard. It's not as fast, not as powerful as Pidgeysard is, and I think that's kind of the disadvantage you get. It's a bit of a slower deck. It doesn't really have, like, any big advantages of playing Bibarel. Like, I don't know if there's a world where I would rather have a Bibarel over a Pidgeot. But then we got to talk about the Pidgeysard deck, the deck that won San Antonio. And I think as we head into the new year, as we head into Portland, I think we can all agree that Pidgeysard is probably the best deck in the format right now. Now, I did take away the Tier S kind of tier, because there isn't really a tier S deck right now. Like Pidgeysard, well, I think that it is the best deck in the format. I think that coming after the win in San Antonio, it's the deck to beat in Portland. It's going to be the most popular deck in Portland. I don't think that Pidgeot Charizard is a tier S deck. There isn't a tier S deck right now, but Pidgeysard is the best deck in format. It just came off hot off of a huge win in San Antonio. It was the most played deck in San Antonio. It's going to be the most played deck in Portland. Not only is it just a strong deck, it also just won a regional, so now there's even more reason to play Pidgeot Charizard. And I definitely think that it is by far the best deck in the format at the moment. That will probably change, though, with Portland. I want to reiterate that. Well, I think Pidgeysard is the best deck right now heading into the new year, heading into Portland. I don't think it's going to keep that status for a while. Like, after Portland, this might end up dropping to Tier 1. I don't know if it'll be the BDIF after Portland. But as we head into the new year and the new format, or not new format, new tournament with Portland, coming off of San Antonio, Pidgeysard is definitely the best deck in the format right now. Chien-Pao Iron Hands is probably just tier 2. It's not a bad deck by any means. It is maybe one of the only decks that, like, kind of beats Charizard. But then I say that as, like, I literally mean kind of beats Charizard. I don't mean that it's actually going to beat Charizard, because I actually don't think Chien-Pao Hands has, like, the greatest Zard matchup ever. It's not like you just completely roll the deck. I think that Chien-Pao has a fine Zard matchup. But Zard, I still think it beat Chien-Pao. Like, now that Zard plays, like, double counter catcher, it's actually pretty shaky for Chien-Pao. I don't think Chien-Pao is the greatest deck. It definitely isn't a bad deck, though. It did have some decent results in San Antonio, like I predicted it would do. But I don't think that Chien-Pao Hands is really, like, the greatest deck ever. It's not bad. It does boast an okay Zard matchup, and that's really all it has going for it overall, in my opinion. I think it has a bad Miraidon matchup still. Rapid Strike isn't great. Even Entei Valiant's not great. Mew's not great. I don't know. It just has too many, like, awkward matchups right now for me to want to call the deck great. I think it's one good matchup is either Zard, and I guess Guardy's not a bad matchup either. Chien-Pao Hands probably has a good Guardy matchup too, but other than that, I don't know if it's worth playing Chien-Pao. Mew. So I think both Fusion and DT Mew are both good tier 1.5 decks. The thing that scares me about playing Mew is just obviously Charizard is really popular. Well, Mew can beat Zard with, like, Judge Path. You know, TM Devo is a great card to play. Even having the Fusion Energy build of Meloetta can be good into Zard. Zard's a very scary matchup, and that's one of the things that kind of makes Mew a little shaky. I think Fusion Mew is better than Double Turbo Mew right now, just because I think that Fusion Mew does have the advantage of Fusion Energy, which is good against Spiritomb. Meloetta is still not bad to have, though I think Double Turbo Mew is also good. Honestly, they're maybe both even in terms of how good they are. I would say that Fusion Mew is better, but I don't know. The more I think about it, the more Double Turbo Mew does seem to be even with Fusion Mew. We did see in San Antonio, the highest performing Mew deck was a double turbo build of Mew, but they were playing like a one of Fusion Energy, which isn't terrible. So I think if you're going to play Mew, you do have to, you know, play Fusion Energy within the deck, whether you're playing Meloetta or whether you're just playing DT Mew with like a one of Fusion Energy or whatever, like we saw in San Antonio. But Mew's not bad. Its worst matchups, obviously, Zard's a little sketchy. Guardy's not great either, I guess, but Mew's not bad. Mew's still good. Mew's Mew. It just, I think it's always going to be around. It's always going to be in, you know, this kind of contention just because it is Mew. Arctura's Rogue. I'm not sure why it's even on the tier list, but Arctura's just fallen off completely. Arctina, however, actually isn't a bad deck. I think it's kind of a tier 2 deck. I mean, we're kind of seeing Arctina decks have a bit of a decent performance now. Couple making day 2 in San Antonio, and even, doing pretty good in the Champions League in Kyoto. So definitely Arctina's still around in the meta. Honestly, if you're going to play an Arcpile deck, it's probably best to play it right now just because of the way the metagame is. Piles have always been okay into stuff like Guardy. I think your Zard matchup's not bad, mainly because Arctina Superior doesn't seem terrible against Zard. It kind of reminds me of like Chien-Pao, where, like I just said, Chien-Pao's kind of okay into Zard, where Arctina's also in that boat of it's kind of okay into Zard too. You're playing Judge Path, which is really good against Charizard, especially the Pidgey build, and you have the Superior, which does give you a bit of grass advantage against Charizard. So you have Disruption plus a one-hit KO option. I know the Arctina Superior deck that did good in San Antonio is playing 2 Superior. Not 1, but 2. And, I mean, Arctina's okay other than that. Like, outside of that, its matchup in a Miraidon, like, it's close because they can, like, donk you. I think your Rapstrike matchup's also kind of iffy. And you're probably, going to be a little iffy into Lost Tina, but you're going to have, like, close matchups into Guardy, into other Charizard decks. Your Mew matchup's good. Your Rapid Strike matchup is shaky, like I said. Your Entei Valiant matchup, however, is going to be good. And Miraidon is obviously going to be a very close matchup. But, I mean, the one thing I will say about Arctina is it actually isn't bad into, like, the Lost Zone box decks. Not counting Giratina. Like I said, Giratina is a little shaky for Arc Piles. But for against, like, other Lost Zone decks like Sableye Charizard, even the Paradox box deck, because you're playing so much hand disruption and annoying disruptive plays, you actually have a better matchup into those type of decks, which is pretty good. And that's one thing I'll say Arc Piles do have going for it. Entei Valiant's probably tier 2. Probably, like, the best tier 2 deck, to be honest. I think the deck is still fine. It doesn't really have, like, any, like, standout matchups as, like, why you'd want to play it. I guess Gholdengo's popular now, so maybe you want to play it because it beats Gholdengo. But, I don't know. It's definitely not a bad deck. Entei Valiant's probably, like, top of tier 2. Like, I wouldn't be able to put it in tier 1.5. I don't think the deck is that good. But as a tier 2 deck, Entei Valiant's fine. It's just kind of the poor man's Rapid Strike at this point, though, which is the main issue with it. Guardy is probably tier 1. I think that it's just behind Charizard in terms of how good the deck is. Guardy's great. Its worst matchups are going to be probably Rapid Strike isn't great. But Charizard's good. And Iron Hand, Chien-Pao, maybe Miraidon are your 2 most awkward matchups. But overall, Guardy's still a fantastic deck. I think Guardy can still go toe-to-toe with Charizard. It is a deck that does have the ability to beat Charizard, in my opinion. So I think that Guardy is still a pretty good deck right now in our format. Still tier 1. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Guardy have a good performance in Portland. I think Guardy is prone to do good in Portland. So definitely expect to see Guardy do good in Portland. I definitely think Guardy is in the tier 1 status. It's not the best deck in the format, but it is close. It is in tier 1. Gholdengo. I guess we'll call it a tier 2 deck. I don't know. I can't put it in Rogue. I mean, it just did good at the Champions League in Kyoto. It's getting a lot of hype right now. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw people bring Gholdengo to Portland and have an okay performance. We might see Gholdengo get day 2. Will it go any higher than, like, maybe a top 64 run, maybe top 32 at best? Probably not. Like, I don't know if we'll see Gholdengo in top 8, but Gholdengo's a cool deck. The fact that Gholdengo is starting to get a bit of an online presence right now, thanks to the Champions League build of it playing the Palkia and the Milotic, does give me hope for Gholdengo for the future. I think we might finally see Gholdengo do well. I don't know. It's definitely like tier 2. It's getting a lot of hype right now. A lot of people are really hyping the deck up, and I think that hype can carry over right now into the new year and into Portland. But I don't think the deck is, like, fantastic. It's definitely not any higher than, like, tier 2. Rapid Strike's probably tier 1 also. I think it is one of the top decks right now in the format. Rapid Strike does have a very strong Charizard matchup. I think that's the advantage of playing it. It kind of beats the 3 big decks. I think it can beat Guardy. I think it beats Charizard, and I think it beats the other big deck that we'll talk about very soon. So I definitely think that Rapid Strike is in a pretty good spot right now in the meta. Definitely a tier 1 deck in my opinion. Very strong deck. Its worst matchup is like Mew, and Mew's like not the worst matchup you can ever fear for. Like, Mew isn't even that popular, right? So I think Rapid Strike is in a fantastic spot still. Still a definite tier 1 deck. Klawf, probably tier 2. I mean, with the popularity of Miraidon and Charizard, right, it's not the worst deck you could play right now, but I don't think that Zard, like, loses to Klawf. Like, a good Zard player can probably beat Klawf, but Klawf isn't a bad deck. It's probably tier 2, kind of like where, like, Chien-Pao. Well, I don't know if I can compare to Chien-Pao in terms of how good it is, but kind of like Gholdengo. It's one of those, like, niche decks that people are going to play regardless. So I think Klawf's still, like, a fine tier 2 deck. With how popular Charizard is really not a bad deck at all. All right, Lugia. I think it's safe to say every Lugia deck is probably a tier 2. Single Strike maybe is a rogue deck. We haven't really seen Single Strike perform that well. in our Paradox meta. So I think we can probably just put Single Strike in the Rogue category. I don't think Single Strike is as bad as people are making it out to be. I think Single Strike Lugia is actually a decent deck, though with how popular Charizard is, that's the problem with Lugia. I think Lugia is not bad into a lot of stuff. I think it's, Rapid Strike matchup's okay. Your Mew matchup's probably not bad. Your Lost Zone matchups aren't bad either. All three of them, like Tina, the Lost Zone pile decks, are all decent. Miraidon is obviously going to be a little sketchy. And then, of course, your Charizard matchup is where things get tough. A lot of the Lugia decks, I think, struggle to beat Zard, because Zard easily beats Lugia, in my opinion. Not only is Lugia, unable to really KO Charizard that effectively, but Charizard also can just KO the Archeops. In my opinion, the way Charizard can beat Lugia is just KO both Archeops, and that's it. The game's over. It's really hard for Lugia to beat Charizard, in my opinion. And I think that's the issue with Lugia right now. It has an abysmal Zard matchup. I think your Guardy matchup's now also not very good because of Screamtail. Guardy is just going to Screamtail your Archeops and knock them out. I think if you're going to play Lugia, you might have to figure out a way to counter Guardy a bit harder, because I do think that Guardy, having access to Screamtail, makes it really hard for Lugia to do well, in my opinion. But Lugia's not a bad deck. I think Lugia's a fine tier 2 deck. It kind of beats everything except for the big 3 decks right now, which is kind of funny. But yeah, Lugia's definitely not the worst deck ever. Not great. I wouldn't recommend it, but they're both okay. I think the best build of it is probably the Vessel build. It's the one that has been getting the best performance, the best results right now. So safe to say the Vessel build of Lugia with Hands, Charizard, even Shaman we've been seeing, it's probably the best way to play it. Colorless Lugia is probably fine too overall. It's just a weaker Vessel build. And then I think Single Strike is just in the Rogue category right now. Though I really don't think that Single Strike Lugia is bad. I think it is a slept-on deck, but I definitely think that it's just kind of mid right now. Next up is Lost Zone Charizard. Another, probably tier 2 deck, maybe even a Rogue deck. It had a bit of a weird performance near the start of Paradox here, and then it didn't really get anywhere in San Antonio, but probably more of a Rogue deck. I don't think you would expect, if your opponent flips over a Comfey, don't expect them to bench a Charmander. You know what I mean? It's definitely just a Rogue deck right now. I think it's fallen off a little bit. It didn't really have any results in San Antonio. It had some results before, but now it hasn't had the results to back it up. All right, next up is Goodra, probably a Rogue deck. I don't think that Goodra is actually, terrible by any means. Honestly, if you were to play it, wouldn't be surprised if you got, day 2 with it. It's not the worst deck you can play, but definitely more of a Rogue deck than anything else. I wouldn't expect... Again, if my opponent flips over a Comfey, I'm not expecting them to bench a Goodra. Then, of course, we got Lost Tina, probably another tier 1 deck right now. Definitely one of the other big decks that seems to be okay right now into Charizard. Tina definitely doesn't really have any bad matchups right now overall. It doesn't really take an auto loss to anything, or any terrible matchups. It kind of just can beat anything. The deck just loses to itself, can lose to its own consistency issues. But Tina definitely is more or less just in tier 1. Probably the weakest tier 1 deck, to be honest with you, but still tier 1. Regardless, I definitely think that Tina is strong, and after it did do good in San Antonio, I wouldn't expect to, not see it again. It's probably going to do well again in Portland. Definitely still a well-positioned deck right now. It can kind of beat anything. It doesn't really take any terrible matchups, and it is another deck that can beat Charizard. In theory, Tina has a good Charizard matchup, in theory. Then we got Sablezard. So I think this deck's actually not terrible. Maybe a tier 1.5 deck. Maybe tier 2. I don't know. Sablezard, I think, is the strongest way to play Lost Box. Or at the very least, I do think that it is a very powerful deck. I think that it's very straightforward with what it does. It doesn't really have any crazy shenanigans like we're seeing with the other Lost Zone variants. But I don't know if I can put the deck, higher than, tier 1.5. Definitely more of a tier 1.5 deck. Maybe one of the weaker ones. I think the Lost Zone decks right now are just perfectly fine. The Lost Box decks aren't terrible. They do seem to be okay into Zard. I think Sablezard actually has an okay Zard matchup, right? You have TM Devolution and stuff, so you're a bit better into Zard than most of the Lost Zone box decks, I would say. Palkia Ice Rider is probably tier 2. I know it got top 8 in the tournament, but I think overall Palkia Ice Rider is perfectly fine. It does seem to be good into Miraidon. But then you're maybe going to more or less struggle into Zard. I think that's the biggest issue for Palkia, is just your Zard matchup isn't the greatest. If Zard can just set up and kind of do everything they need to do every turn, Palkia cannot keep up with Zard, in my opinion. Even if you're playing in a Alolan Vulpix, or maybe if you try out Articuno in the deck, your Zard matchup is still kind of shaky, in my opinion. Your Mew matchup's good. Your Guardy matchup is close. Your Tina matchup's probably pretty close too. Yeah, I don't know. Palkia is a perfectly fine deck. Definitely a tier 2 deck. I know it did do good in San Antonio with that top 4 run, but I just don't know if the deck can be any higher than a tier 2 deck. I wouldn't expect to see Palkia become super popular or anything. Though it is a really cool deck nonetheless. Snorlax, definitely is a tier 1 deck. I think Snorlax control is still very strong right now. It is a deck that just beats Charizard, right? I mean, Snorlax control just like flat out beats Pidgeysard. Like it's really good. Like your matchup into Charizard is like an auto win almost. It's such a good matchup. It's one of the reasons why you would want to play Snorlax for Portland. Is because it beats Charizard. But the thing is Snorlax is also not popular and not a deck that you would expect to see be that good. I know it went like 9-0 day one of San Antonio, and that was because of Charizard's popularity. And I think even heading into Portland, the people who are going to bring Charizard are probably not going to over-tech for Snorlax. Like, I don't think if you're playing against Pidgeysard, your opponent's randomly going to tech in like double Turo or, you know, like double Minior, just something ridiculous like that. Like, I wouldn't expect to see any Miniors in the Pidgeysard decks at all. Like, I don't think anyone is going to tech for Snorlax. Like, if I'm going to Portland, I'm probably not teching for Snorlax. I'm going to play a deck that if I can beat it, I can beat it. I'm going to play to my outs. I'm going to try my hardest to beat it. But if I lose to it, whatever. I'm not going to tech for a deck that's not going to be popular. Though, despite the deck not being popular, I think the deck is still very, very good. It's in that situation right now, boasting a really good Zard matchup, and I think that's one of the things that props it up. The Lost Zone, like, Paradox Toolbox decks, I guess the same thing with, like, Turbo Lost Box. I think they're both, like, tier 1.5. I think Lost Box is in a fine spot right now. Their worst matchups obviously going to be stuff like the Rapid Strike deck. Guardy with Jirachi can be tough, too. Some Guardy lists are cutting Cresselia, though, which is a big deal. Yeah, I don't think that the Lost Zone Mirage Gate builds aren't too shabby. I think the Paradox build is better than playing it with, like, Dragonite, though the Dragonite build is doing okay. I mean, we did see the Lost Zone deck win the Champions League over in Kyoto, so clearly the deck still has, you know, momentum and legs right now, and I think the deck is still fine. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a Lost Box deck in top 8 in Portland. Like, I definitely think that it is very possible for that to happen. So yeah, I think they're all like perfectly fine tier 1.5 decks. I'm a bigger fan of Sablezard right now, but I definitely don't hate the Paradox builds or like any build using Dragonite and Kyogre and stuff like that. Then we got to talk about Roaring Moon, probably another like decent tier 2 deck, kind of just another, you know, big basic beat stick deck like Chien-Pao, like Iron Valiant Entei, just kind of in that tier 2 category of like the deck's okay. It is getting a little bit more attention now that it had a decent run in the Champions League in Kyoto, and it has been bubbling under the radar in these regionals now for a while, so the deck definitely is on the come up for sure. It's definitely a deck that is starting to rise in popularity, and maybe we'll see Roaring Moon have a better performance in Portland than we may think. We'll have to see, though. Roaring Moon Zard matchup is close. If Zard can... Like, Zard is probably going to beat you because you do have to, like, constantly frenzy gouging yourself to low HP, which can be tough. If Zard can, like, take an early lead against you, it's really tough to win because you just kind of lose the prize trade every time. But Moon's, like, okay. It's definitely kind of like Chien-Pao and Valiant Entei, where the deck's fine, and it just kind of does its thing as a big, basic beat stick deck. Urshifu Valiant's probably tier 2. Another deck that's, like, decent right now. I think this deck's actually really underrated in the meta. It did have a decent run in the Champions League in Kyoto, and we've been seeing a few Urshifu Valiant decks in top 32 at some of the recent European regionals. I don't think the deck is going to be that popular. I don't think many people are going to play it, but there might be, like, one or two that sneak under the radar. I think low-key the deck is actually secretly kind of good. I think it is a pretty strong deck that, if piloted correctly, I think can be a very good deck. I think it's a great deck. I think it's good. I'm going to put it in tier 2. Zoroark, probably Rogue. I want this deck to do good so badly. I guess now with Zard's popularity, it's maybe the best time to play Zoroark, but I don't think Zoroark is any higher than just a Rogue deck right now, unfortunately. We talk about the Miraidon. So Miraidon has two variants right now. There's the Path build with Ionos and Judge and stuff like that. And then there's the Peony build that just tries to play a ton of energy. The Peony build was the best performing Miraidon deck in San Antonio. So I think both builds of Miraidon are both in tier 1 right now. I think that both Miraidon, Peony, and Path are both reasonable. Like, if you were to go to Portland and you were like, what Miraidon build should I play? Should I play Path? Should I play Peony? Which one is better? I would say, honestly, test both of them, see which one you like the best, see which one you're more comfortable with, roll with either one. I think both builds are perfectly fine. They both are obviously going to be a little bit tougher in Zard. I do think that Path is slightly better in Zard than the Peony build. The Peony build is faster and more aggressive and has a lot more, you know, pop-off plays, which is better, but then the Path build can kind of have a little bit more tacticalness with the paths, and even if you want to play Judge or not, can also be a big deal. Miraidon's definitely still a very strong deck right now, definitely in the tier 1 category in my opinion, and we'll have to see where it goes. The only thing really holding Miraidon back is that it just seems to have a bit of a weak Charizard matchup, or at the very least, it seems that Charizard should beat Miraidon most of the time. Finally, we got Arc Gigas, another rogue deck, maybe in tier 2, like with Arctina, maybe a rogue deck. I don't think the deck is, like, I would, like, if somebody was to flip over an Arceus, I would expect to more see a Giratina than a Gigas come down. I think that the Gigas Arc deck is actually still decent, though. Like, it is a good deck. Like, it's like Arc Goodra. It's like one of those things, or Lost Goodra, sorry, where it's like, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody played it and made day 2 with it. Like, it's definitely a very strong deck. I feel like putting in the rogue category is kind of giving it a bit of a disservice of how good the deck actually is. It's maybe the best rogue deck actually in the rogue category. It's maybe barely a tier 2 deck. Maybe it's a tier 2. Maybe it's a tier 2 deck. I don't know. It is a cool deck, and I think it is actually a very strong deck. And with its run in San Antonio, there is a world where we start to see Arc Gigas see a little bit more play. Is it the best way to play Arc over Tina? I'm not too sure, but I definitely think that Arc Gigas is fine. I would just expect to see my opponent flip over a Giratina and an Arc more than an Arc and a Gigas if I were to go against Arceus. But Arc Gigas isn't bad by any means. Definitely a fine archetype, and maybe doing a bit of a disservice being in Rogue. But there you have it. That is the tier list here for 2024. The Portland Regionals coming up. This tier list is a decent kind of tier list, in my opinion, to kind of look at. Let me know if you think my opinions were good or not. Were there any decks that maybe should have been shifted around? I'm not too sure, because this is, I think, where the metagame is right now, or in my opinion, where decks are, how good decks are. I think currently the best deck is Charizard. I don't think anyone's going to argue that. Whether you want to say, oh, it's not actually the best deck, I think this is the best deck. I know, Charizard's the best deck. It's the most popular deck. It's going to be the one that's going to see the most amount of play in Portland, coming off of a major regionals win. Charizard's best deck. We just got to see what happens after Portland. That'll impact where Charizard, because maybe after Portland, we see Zard go down to like tier 1, maybe tier 1.5. It can happen, for sure. It can happen. But there you have it, folks. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed, leave a like. I'll leave a link down below to the tier list if you want to go do it yourself. And I'll see you all in another video. Bye-bye.